All righty. Before we go, I just want to highlight this quote, which I run across a lot of quotes and make a note of them. But in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned, the people that already know, find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And I think this training that we've got set up is, to me, exemplifies what this thing says, and I just thought I'd put that in there. Of course, this is a photo that we have in the lobby. Herb at about 18 years old, and I don't think there's a better photograph that I know of that shows kind of the bare bones place that he came from. If you look at his shoe in that photograph, and it's worn through, looks like right to his socks almost, right to his bare feet. A lot of people think he's smoking a cigarette, but to my knowledge, he never smoked. And I have no idea who took this picture. Of course, back in 1924, everybody didn't have the cell phone snapping pictures all the time, right, and doing selfies. So I have no idea who took this picture. That's something I wish I knew, but I'd never be able to find out. But anyways, I think this just highlights the humility that Herb came from, and the humility that I think he exhibited throughout his life. This is just a map that I pulled up of the main state highways in 1920. There was no interstate, as you can see. And I know it's probably smaller than you can pick up any detail to. And I tried to get a similar map of today's roadways, just that I could put on the sheet, but I couldn't find one that fit that you could also see and read. But the point of this is, I got this book called Moving the Earth, and that my dad and I had written about Herb. And I'm not going to get too much into the history from 1926 to 1975, only because it's better established in this and the book that I'm going to be am writing. But it's a pretty significant difference, the state, and the way I look at it is, the name of this book is called Moving the Earth, and I say Moving Maine. And I think that if you look down through, if we were able to plot, and someday I'm going to get to this, like every place we've ever done a project on the state, and if you put a 10-mile radius around it, there would not be much state that's not covered with those dots. And that's significant also in New Hampshire, and becoming more and more significant in Virginia as well. Just an example, this is a project, this is the old double-aught shovel from 1930 that he bought, and that's Herb in there literally walking across the Penobscot River to go from one bridge abutment to the other because it was so far to get around by road. And you can see, you all know the history of the company in terms of how much interstate is built. There's a publication out there that we either paved or graded or both over 60% of the interstate in Maine, and that says nothing about, numerous bypasses and other upgrades and rebuilds of roads and that sort of thing. 62, this is my dad, Jim, Herb, and Ralph Leonard on the right. So this is a few years after my dad joined the company. He was in the Army and then returned back. Ralph married Herb's daughter, my dad's sister, and joined the company more in the maintenance side, the equipment side of the business. We were just talking about this truck here. I think this was a brand new truck if you look at that picture, and Mack Truck doesn't make those anymore. I don't know how long they made those. Doug asked that question. But this is John Ellis in the machine loading it, and I think that's 1967 or 8 in Damariscotta on a piece of Route 1, the bypass in Damariscotta. Interstate work going on with scrapers. They started bringing scrapers into the world, or into this part of the world, back in the late 50s and 60s. Herb was known as saying that be not the first to set aside the old, nor the last to adopt the new. So scrapers were a big deal, and my dad always called the company a scraper outfit back in the back in the 60s and 70s. So those are twin engine Euclid TS-24 scrapers. If Roy was here, we got some pictures of those in there, and Brandon's grandfather was looking at it one day in here, and he said that was the second generation. The first generation, the headlights were a little bit higher. And I mean, he knew the details of these machines. More scrapers on interstate work. This is cat scrapers, obviously. And this is when Caterpillar began to get bigger. In the 70s, Herb was on the hunt for always what the next best thing was. And you can see some Cat 769 here. This is over at the J Paper Mill. And this is the first hydraulic excavator the company had. And you can see this guy here in the middle of the screen. He's walking down over, and he's got a compressor hose going down. He's got a hand drill down there to drill off these boulders to shoot them, so this excavator can handle them.
No PPE.
Yeah.
How about walking down the side of the...
Well, as much as I hate to say it, there were more than one journal entry that Herb put in that said, we lost an employee today at work. And my recollection is there's like 4 of those. This is me in 1986, and Herb up in Monticello. This is a job that Herb's first highway job was this same piece of road in Monticello in 1936. In 1986, we got the contract. This goes over a hill, and we got the contract to lower the hill by about 14 feet. And we had a waste area that was so close we could pick it up and carry it with a 988. And Herb came up to give me a few pointers. So from there, I'm going to just pause and go, because now we're into kind of the 70s and 80s. And I don't know if you guys can see online, I sent you the drawing that I put up, but I've got a timeline here from 75 to 2025, just to kind of talk about some of to me, this is the part of the company's history that is probably more pertinent to us, not to take anything away from that first 50 years, but this is kind of the first set of succession in 1975. Herb and Jim and Ralph succeeded Herb as owners of the company. Jim became the president. Ralph became the chair of the board of directors. They bought CCB in about 79 or 80. I don't have that exact date. And then the CCB was later sold in the mid-90s. In about 1984, Jim and Ralph started to spread out a little bit. Central Equipment Company was a part of H.E. Sargent, was a subsidiary, and we also had an asphalt paving, portable plant and a paving crew. And so Ralph took Central Equipment Company as his own company, and as a result, kind of to make it even, my father took over the paving division, and he called it Yankee Construction Incorporated. So they started to do more, they started to get more and more spread out. In the next couple of years, my father started Yankee Construction Corporation, which was the bridge vertical building company. It took a lot of his attention, probably more than he intended for it to. At the same time, and I'm talking about the early to mid 80s, Ralph got involved in the Penobscot Energy Recovery Facility, the PERC plant, and also was working to get a new landfill developed down in Township 30. So these guys both began to have a lot more interest and were beginning to draw more funds away from the company to support these things they had going on. And I don't think the company was ever in danger of failure, but kind of like we were not too long ago, thin on capital, working capital. About 1987, W.E. Cloutier came up for sale. And it's an interesting reading both my dad's journals and my grandfather's journals kind of day by day. And my grandfather says, it looks like we're interested in W.E. Cloutier. I'm really concerned that Jim is overextended from a management standpoint and really think we shouldn't do this. And then reading Dad's journal on about the same day, and it's like, we got this opportunity for W.E. Cloutier, it looks like a great thing, and I think we're gonna pull this off. So about 1987, bought W.E. Cloutier. And then on August 28, 1987, Jim receives a letter from Smith Barney, who did things the old-fashioned way. They earned it. For anybody that's old enough to remember that, none of you, maybe you. So this is a letter my dad got from Smith Barney, which is an investment banker, and they had been hired by Rizal. This doesn't say it's Rizal, but they had been hired by Rizal to find an acquisition in the Northeast United States. Rizal already had a company that they owned in Houston, Texas. It was an oil well maintenance company. And so as I'm writing this book, one of the things I did, Gerard Tassel was an individual that came over from Paris with the Rizal company, and he actually still lives here. What was the situation with H.E. Sargent? Why were the Rizal brothers interested in H.E. Sargent? And he said, well, we spread out a big fan, and he said, I came and I did the initial due diligence with the first 6 companies, and then Claude Rizal came over and met with Jim, and we went and had dinner afterwards, and he asked me what I thought. So this is Claude now asking Gerard what he thought, and he said, if we don't buy H.E. Sargent, we have to go start over again. This is the company we need to buy. So July 21st, 1988, they closed the deal to sell to Rizal. So Rizal acquires H.E. Sargent. Rizal had operations in Africa as well as all over France. And shortly after that acquisition took place by Rizal, they ran into financial trouble. Everything in Africa that they had, really unstable region. They were in Nigeria, so really unstable region. And everything fell apart for them there. Things started to fall apart in France with the economy. Things started to fall apart here with the economy. And so Rizal sold in 1989, I think it was, to another company from France. And then as I was talking to Gerard here about a month ago or so, I said, why did Jim leave? And he said he just couldn't deal with the management by committee, in effect. So in 1989, in one of those books I've got over there, there's a letter from my dad to the employees saying, I thought I was going to stay, but I'm not going to stay. So he left in 1989. I stayed through the end of 91. I had a job at Loring Air Force Base that I really wanted to see completed. And then through 1991, during that period between Jim leaving and me leaving, frankly, I felt like I was totally out of alignment with John Simpson and the way he was running the company, and frankly, the values he didn't have, I felt. And so that was a big piece on me that I felt I needed to leave. So I left and started Sargent with my brother in 1992. In 1994, I think it was, Rizal, their parent sold out to a larger company. So the whales just kept getting bigger. And that company also owned Frucon in St. Louis. And so as a result, they slid H.E. Sargent under Frucon in 1994-ish. And that's about the same time we started our Mid-Atlantic operation in 1994. We've done a lot of work around that. Now over this next, let's say 8 years, I'm competing heavily with H.E. Sargent. Fair amount of acrimony going on. About 3 months after I started in business, I got a letter from John Simpson saying he was going to sue me if we didn't cease and desist using the Sargent name. And I basically responded and said, I could use the free publicity, go ahead. So we went on through 1999. George Thomas called me about this time of year, and he said, so George had been taken now from Stillwater to St. Louis and with Frucon, but he wanted to come back. And so he joined me in, I think it was April of 2000. And later that year, Tim joined me in December of 2000. So we began a pretty substantial growth period. We were doing about 9 or 10 million at the time. I'm talking about Sargent & Sargent. At the same time, H.E. Sargent was doing a lot of MBNA work. I mean, the H.E. Sargent grew like crazy. The Yankee construction thing got brought back in under the company and just called H.E. Sargent Constructors at first. And then we grew pretty substantially from 2000 to 2005. 2003, we heard that Frucon and the Germans really didn't have much interest in H.E. Sargent anymore. So we began to think about a way to, if we could pull something off to make it happen. So in 2005, we acquired the assets of H.E. Sargent. And this is a piece of the story that, well, I lived it, so it's important to me, but I think it often gets swept out because it's just like H.E. Sargent's 100th anniversary. But if none of this ever happened, I don't think we'd be where we are today. And I had a lot of people ask me, you know, in 2005, when we bought the company back, I had half a dozen people say, don't you wish they hadn't sold, you know, you'd have been in the same place. And I said, I would, in 1,000 tries, I would do it 999 times the same way. I think part of the reason they sold the company, I think there were a number of reasons, but I think, number one, Jim and Ralph just didn't get along well enough to keep working together. They had all these other interests outside the company. And frankly, I think they were trying to spare the rest of the family from all the potential acrimony that was going to take place here as we kept going. 2005, bought H.E. Sargent. 2008, 9 had some really good years. You can see I put the recessions, by the way, in red. So what have I got? 5 recessions here and COVID. So in 2005 to 2009 were really incredible years for us, and we needed them because I had to borrow a ton of money to make that acquisition. But of course, you know, in 2008 we had the Great Recession. We had a wonderful backlog going through 2009. So in 2009 actually was our best year to date. We did about $120 million and made about $12 million. So that filled our pocketbooks up to the point we thought we could go do other things. And when I say we, I'm talking about me. So we went in the ready-mix business in 2010, and we were going to conquer the world in the ready-mix business. And I think this is worth saying because as I've read more and more, this ready-mix business, this was the 4th time we've been in the ready-mix business in our history. Going along, 11, 12, 13, you know, were not really good years. 13 was a loss year for us. And then the economy started coming back. 2016, we bought Mollison. 2016 was also our first year of Sargent Construction Academy. We bought Mollison, and that's not really pertinent to, but to me, that I believe that took a lot of our, it was a distraction. Anybody that's, I know Tasha and Eric can appreciate what a distraction that was. I was spending a lot of time every week with Mollison trying to keep his feet on the ground. 2020, as you know, COVID came along. I skipped over 2013 when we became an ESOP, didn't I? Which I had on the wall in there. So 2013, I just want to talk a little bit about the ESOP thing. As Tasha knows, right when I bought H.E. Sargent, my question was, okay, this is great, but my kids are not part of this organization. They don't want to be part. How do I get out eventually? How do we keep this thing going? And ESOP was something that I'd heard about. And we hired a couple different people to do some studies. Tasha and George and I went down to a seminar in Boston that talked about ESOP. And then in 2012, I got in a peer group with Emery Sapp and Sons, which they were part of. Keith Bennett, who you all know is on our board. And Keith just kind of opened his arms to us in terms of talking about ESOP and what it could mean. Tim and George and I met with his ESOP attorney out in Kansas City in the fall of 2012. And it just seemed like the right thing to do. And by 2013, we found our favorite ESOP attorney locally who got us into the ESOP world. So on April 30th, 2013, we became ESOP. Back to Mollison, moving ahead. 14, 15 was another wonderful year, great year for us. made, I think, 13, 14 million dollars on 130 million, something like that. 16, we started trending downward. 17, a little bit more downward. And what I've, reflecting back, the conclusion I've come to is when I say we now, I'm talking about Tim and me, we have never seen an economy that's been like the one we have now. Like all these economies going back to when Tim and I came on board here from 75 on, we've never seen anything like this. And in a way, it's kind of scary. So this thing outran our ability to grow, and we kept bidding the way we always bid. Like we got to bid everything in order to keep the plate full. And then in 2018, we did strategic planning, and that kind of got us, I think, on a better footing in terms of how to approach the market. 2020, COVID hit, sold Mollison, sold the ready mix. Eric pedaled off the ready mix operation. I was able to get Mollison sold. Tasha and I were to CCB, believe it or not. They circled all the way back in the picture 30 some years later, 40 years later. And now we talked about our stock price being 100 by the time we turn 100, and smart people tell me it's going to be well north of 200 at the end of this year. So, I just feel so good about where we are as a company. I feel so good about the leadership when I look around this table. Some of you folks have heard me say this, but at our board meeting this past year, I had Jackson Blaze up there as an example of what we're doing here. And the last banner I put up was this: he's got 40 years to go. And it hit me really hard at that moment when I said that that was 5 of us on the board. And it's like, this board is going to turn over how many times in 40 years? I don't know. This leadership is going to turn over how many times in 40 years? This table will probably be populated by a whole different set of people in 40 years. You can stay. But the point is, we've got to, I look at this as a promise now to the Jackson Blazes, to the people that haven't even been born yet that are going to be coming to work for us. I look at this ESOP thing as a promise that we made, that we've got to give, and succession is the key to that. If we can't have succession, really good succession, and one of the things I say about succession is what we want from succession is not for it to be knobby, to slow us down. We want to accelerate through that zone, and I feel like we're doing that now in the current succession. So I'll go back to the slides here. To me, the morale, the culture, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about culture. You got Seth Fern, a kid that came out of high school in 2016, joined the First Academy. I don't know what his salary is now, but he's doing very well for himself. Has a pretty healthy ESOP balance. I don't know about his 401k, but he's become a young guy we can count on. At least that's what all I've heard. Kevin, man, I can't say enough about Kevin. And that's Jackson in the background. You can tell Jackson, even in that picture in 2020, is probably 30 pounds, 40 pounds heavier than he is now. But Kevin's ability to teach is something that I learned about Kevin way back in 1983 when he and I were laboring together in Essex Junction, Vermont. Not only can he out-shovel about 10 people, but he can out-teach about 10 people. And the way he teaches and the values he teaches are the important thing to me. And this is 23's class, I believe, and we got some young leaders still coming up through here. Some of these folks aren't with us anymore. Just want to touch on this. This is, if you haven't seen, this is what I call our altitude. So if you look at this chart, the highest is, say, 32,000 up at the top of the chart, and the lowest is the ground level. And so coming out of buying H.E. Sargent in 2005, we climbed up, we did pretty well. We had a pretty low altitude because we had so much debt, we were heavy. But as we made money and began to pay off some of that debt up through 2008, we gained altitude. Then even though I show 2009 as being kind of a downer year for us. That was our best year. But the reason it shows in red and going down is because part of the measurement, the way I kind of calculate this, is I use backlog and backlog quality. And we just didn't have any backlog going into 2010 to speak of. Or put it this way, the quality of that backlog wasn't as good. You guys, Doug and Matt, that survived COAS wind, know that that wasn't great backlog. It was busy backlog, but it wasn't great backlog. And it just got tougher and tougher through 2013. 2014, we began to climb out again. But what happened is we just didn't have enough people to really do the work right. So by 2016, 17, we were headed back down. 2018, I think, was our lowest year since the recession. And that's when we did our strategic planning. And then I put this slide in only because during that period, that recession, we did not have enough resources to be able to plan much more than a year ahead. I mean, we were literally at that altitude we were flying at that point in time in 2013. We were surviving, literally surviving. We weren't thriving at all, and we weren't making much in the way of investments in people. And 2016, that's when we started to make investments, but it was only after we saw that we kind of outran our people, and that went on for a couple years. But we've really focused heavily on investing in people, and that's why it's such an important value for us. And I think, you know, you can see where it's helped us a lot as we've continued to climb out of that slump in 2018. What I want to be careful of is that we don't take just one piece of information like, oh, we invested in people, so we made money and grew. It's not just that, right? There's a lot of things that contribute to this. The market, we can't ignore the fact that the market has continued to be incredible for us. And when you look around the industry, you know, go into Dirt World, you see all these guys that have been in business 5-10 years that are doing $50 and $100 million in business already. And, you know, the market's just been really, really good for the whole industry. So I want to make sure we don't just take this as a, well, if we just keep pouring money into people, we'll just always do better. That's not necessarily true. But I do believe that's had, I think, drawing our pursuits back down in 2018, we bid $1.2 billion worth of work and got about 10%. In 2019, we bid about $600 million worth of work, and I think we got about 25% that year. So cut our pursuits in half, got a lot more strategic about what we approached, and that's kind of where we are now.
Great.
Any questions on history? Please, if there's something, I mean, I skipped 50 years really in a way, but if there's something that you'd like to see more or hear more of, you're gonna have to wait a year and a half and I'll give you a book.